So, Mark, you said something very interesting recently. You said you actually don't think this race is going to be close. It's either going to be Kamala decisively or Trump decisively. Is that correct?
I'm not sure, but that's my base case. I think either female voters will swarm to the polls, something you flagged by saying, men got to turn out. And if they swarm to the polls where they're 55% of the electorate and they vote decisively for Kamala Harris, I think she would win big. And I think that would be uniform across at least 5 and maybe as many as 6 or maybe even 7 of the battleground states. But I think it's more likely that if it's a big win, it's Donald Trump's big win. At this point, I don't think she's got a good chance. I don't say no chance, but I think she's got a good chance to win any of the 4 Sunbelt states. And so for her to win big, it's going to mean winning big in the 3 Great Lakes states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. If it's really big, maybe those Sunbelt states come back into play. But the reason I continue to think President Trump has a better chance to win is I see multiple paths for him, and I see it more likely that he gets that big win than that she does. But as I said, if she has a chance to win, I think it would be because women give her an unexpectedly large win, both in the popular vote and the Electoral College.
Yeah, and look, I want to be very clear and humble the audience a little bit to try to get some urgency. Mark, Kamala allies are feeling more confident this week than last week. Is that correct?
Oh, night and day. Last week, it was hard to find folks who gave her much of a chance. It's not clear what's caused their increased confidence, except they are winning, not every day, but for the last week, they've won what political professionals call the information flow. That's, I think, and some people could compare that to vibes, and they certainly have an advantage in information flow because the dominant media is on their side. But they are much more confident than they were, but it's hard to get them to give actual data. They trotted out David Plouffe, who's greatly respected by people in politics and media, to say that the undecided voters are breaking towards Kamala Harris. In part, they claimed because of Madison Square Garden. I think there should be data to back that up. It's a kind of a bold assertion. But I think partly because her events are really good now, and President Trump has had some bad events, and partly because David Plouffe came out with his credibility and said things are breaking their way. They are much more confident, but again, not data-driven as far as I can tell, but simply vibes-driven.
So, Mark, you've been doing this for a long time. Tony Fabrizio, who is Donald Trump's pollster, famously says presidential races move glacially, that it is very slow and not as abrupt. That could be right. We're in a new era where everyone has a supercomputer in your right-hand pocket. It's not 2004 anymore. In your experience, can the last week, especially when you have a candidate that is so defined already as Donald Trump, can a not great week really be that determinative? Does your experience tell you that the last week is actually pretty important?
It is in a race that the polls suggest is close. And remember, even on the Trump side, the most optimistic people on the Trump side, as you well know, maybe some of them think he could win these states, some of these states by 5 points. But they're more talking about wins by 2 points, which again, in our 50-50 nation, would be akin to a landslide. But why the end matters, it's like when I played high school basketball, and at one important game, I made a turnover and I missed a shot in the fourth quarter. And my coach singled me out for special criticism. And I pointed out that my teammates had made mistakes throughout the game. And he said, mistakes in the fourth quarter matter more because there's no time to make up for them. And what you've seen in the last week is Donald Trump. Look, I think the garbage truck thing and the press conference and then the story he told, I think that was obviously a great moment. There are 3 things happening now for both campaigns. Convincing undecided voters, and I think people who say there aren't any undecided voters left haven't watched my platform because we talk every day to people who are still undecided. And undecided can be who to vote for, but it can also be whether to vote, right?
That's right.
So undecided voters. Then there's getting your people who are for you to the polls because it could rain or they could have a bad day at work or the subway could be closed. And then there's the sort of seamier thing, which is voter suppression to try to keep people from voting. So if the race is a blowout, does the last week matter? No. But just like if I missed a shot and turned the ball over and we were up 20 points, my coach wouldn't care. But in a close game, a close contest, yeah, the last week matters like the fourth quarter matters. And both these campaigns know that mistakes now could be a big deal. That's why a lot of people in Trump world freaked out yesterday when in his first event of the day that I happened to be covering in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, probably the worst Trump event I've ever been to in terms of his performance. And people said, Mr. President, you can't go through the rest of the day with that level of performance. It makes a difference. And she's doing well. Her events are quite good now. And it could be literally the information flow in this last week could make her president of the United States. That if it is close, and if I'm right, that information flow matters. I think it does.
Yeah, and again, this is you got to run through the tape. That's what everyone says, and you got to run through the tape. And I sent out a cockiness tweet about a week and a half ago where I said cockiness is cancer, and there were some people just kind of in the orbit that guaranteed a victory, Mark. Guaranteed. I'm sure you heard that kind of language.
Yeah. Well, look, every campaign deals with this. It's a balance between not being cocky, making sure no one gets complacent. They keep giving you money. They keep volunteering. They keep door knocking. But you also want the bandwagon effect. And I think one of the things that the Harris people have done brilliantly, because again, the top level people there are very experienced in political communication, is they went the whole campaign, the first 100 or so days, saying, we're the underdog, to keep the money coming in, to keep people with their guard up, to keep the volunteers volunteering. But I think they changed right around the time campaigns normally do, with a week to go. And they had Madison Square Garden to key off of. And they had her the enthusiasm of her events, not just large events, but enthusiastic celebrities showing up, performing well. And you had some missteps by President Trump, including yesterday. And so they're able to switch from underdog to bandwagon, be with the winner, turn out, vote for us, make it happen. And I think they probably plan to execute that the entire way, because that's kind of the textbook thing to do. But you're right that some people in President Trump's orbit have been on, we've got this locked for longer than most campaigns would. That's partly the fact that the data that people in Trump world have is quite positive. There's reasons looking at the internal data to be bullish, but it's also kind of a cultural, anthropological difference between the two parties. Republicans just tend to beat their chests more, and Democrats tend to worry a bit more.